Hey guys, Swanee here. Recently, someone asked me a question in all seriousness. I've seen it asked or suggested before, but I don't recall ever seeing a proper response to it. So, after answering the question, I got thinking and remembered I had intended to address it years ago, but never did. Not formally, anyway. The question was, why don't police shoot people in the arms or legs? Why do they kill them? Well, there isn't a valid 15-second answer to this question. But I remembered I had recorded some videos to try to show why that approach is both dangerous and improbable. I got with some police academy instructors and we recorded some scenarios. The suspect in the videos is armed with a knife that we marked up with paint to show when or if the officer ended up getting cut when attacked. If you're not already aware, edge weapons are bad news. I want nothing to do with them. But the officer in the video is armed with a training gun that shoots paint projectiles. In addition to protective equipment, they're both wearing white shirts so we can see if the contact was made and where. The videos are arranged to show a few common scenarios law enforcement officers encounter. Keep in mind, these videos were shot in 2014. I simply just didn't do anything with them until now. If I had to do it again, there are a few things I would do a little differently, but the data remains the same. Let's take a look at the videos.
Gun! Gun! Gun!
All right, so the lateral movement scenario, on the third take, we were able to get 2 rounds on the target in a static environment. We've got 2 underneath the arm there in the rib cage area. Out of three takes, that was the best that we could do with making some adjustments in a static and controlled training environment. We were able to make those adjustments, and 2 rounds out of 4 was the best that we can do. We have to consider where those first two rounds, where they went, bystanders, houses, cars, things of that nature.
Drop the weapon! Right now.
This here's our bad guy from the first take on the knife scenario. Bad guy. Officer is able to get, again, approximately 6 rounds center mass on the bad guy, shooting for center mass. We have a subject coming at the officer with the knife. The officer gives the command to drop the weapon, already had the weapon in his hand, observing the threat. The subject with the knife rushes the officer. The officer is able to get approximately 6 rounds on target. However, the officer is still able to get cut. If you see there on the arm, we have major arteries in our arms, and that could very easily turn into a bleed out. Okay, in this scenario, well, we had a offender with a knife who attacked an officer whose gun was holstered. The offender was able to almost completely penetrate the officer before the officer was able to get 4 rounds off. All those rounds were able to hit center mass in the area, center mass area, 4 shots. But the officer also sustained knife injuries as well. From that same scenario, here's here's the officer's wounds. Got 1 to the upper chest, 1 to the outside shoulder. In this scenario, the officer's weapon is drawn. He has identified the knife as a threat. There's approximately 21 feet between the officer and the bad guy. The officer is going to attempt to shoot for the limbs only to satisfy that idea that is practical in law enforcement. All right, in this scenario, the bad guy closed the distance of approximately 21 feet. The officer purposely attempted to shoot for the limbs, which ended up being the right arm, and the officer was able to get 3 rounds on the target, but not before sustaining serious cuts to his own person. From the scenario, the officer was attempting to aim at the offender's limbs only, the arm. This officer took several cuts to their person, both wrists, there on the left rib area, that nice tissue, important tissue. Got a couple on the shoulders and so forth. The officer would have sustained a serious amount of injury from this attack. Although the officer was able to get 3 rounds on the target, the officer took significant knife damages to himself as well.
Gun! Gun!
All right, so these targets were posted to simulate civilian population in this deadly force encounter. These rounds here were rounds that were missed the target. Had there been a crowd of people, a child riding their bike, my child, your child, or anything of the like, cars riding by, whatever you can imagine, these rounds have to go somewhere, and they could very possibly end up in someone else. This is why law enforcement is so dangerous, and the stress that is caused from these deadly force encounters is so paramount, and this is why officers are trained to stop the threat as quickly as possible. Police use of force is a multi-layered topic. It's governed by the laws of the land, and precedent is established and accounted for by U.S. Supreme Court case law, our highest court. Officers often find themselves in tense and uncertain situations. Because of how quickly these things evolve, officers are often forced to make harrowing decisions in a matter of just a few moments. The videos you just watched illustrate not only how quickly things can turn violent, but also how the risk of injury to the officer still remains high, even after lethal force is used. This next video is actual footage of a recent shooting in Michigan. The suspect here is wanted for a murder that was committed just prior to this encounter. It shows in real time why shooting for limbs is improbable.
What? Drop it! Drop it! Drop it! Drop it! Drop the weapon! Drop it! Drop the weapon! Yeah! Drop the weapon! Drop it! Drop it! Drop it! Drop it! Drop the weapon! Drop the weapon! Drop the weapon! Down! Get on your stomach! Get on your stomach now! Get on your stomach!
Under real stress, it's unreasonable to ask officers to try to shoot for limbs. While officers aren't trained to kill, they are trained to stop the threat. Trying to accurately shoot limbs with minimal movement will be challenging by itself. Then you add stress and moving body parts, and it becomes a tall order. Every officer is responsible for every round fired from their gun. Imagine an officer conducting a stop outside of a city park where families are playing. Lethal force is used, and errant rounds strike innocents. The outcome would certainly be deemed unacceptable. Preservation of life is a principal tenet of law enforcement. Unfortunately, sometimes an officer's hand is tipped, and lethal force is necessary to protect their life or someone else's. It's an unfortunate byproduct of the profession, one that every noble officer hopes never comes to fruition.